Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. The series is concluded with this last installment, which is section 2.4 of my theories of ethnicity and nationalism. I'm pleased to say that the series is over 20 hours long. It's probably about 21 hours long, which is in itself an accomplishment. I take pride in the effort it took to prepare the notes, research the information, present it, upload it, record it, blah blah blah. And the idea is, I hope that this is useful for you, whomever you may be. You could be a fellow academic, you could be a graduate student. My intent is to do this primarily for graduate students, to assist you in understanding any complex bits of any ethical theories, national theories, any theoretical paradigms. And I want you to remember the contribution that I've made for you, and I have. And when and if you get to this point, I want you to assume a responsibility to do the same, right? It's important that once we've arrived, that we give back. I live this. You see the product of me doing this. If I were a wealthy man, I would give back in terms of money, but I can give back in terms of my labor. And it's important that we continue this, right? Because this has benefited you. You didn't have to pay for it. There was no obligation on your part. Download the notes, use the notes to supplement your learning, watch the videos, and change the world. So with that, let's continue this final section of my theories of ethnicity and nationalism. And this is section 2.4. I've said it before, if I do a second, which, you know, this in itself is quite the task, but if I do a second installment of this lecture series, so that, like, Theories of Ethnicity and Nationalism 2, if I do a second installment, it's going to weigh more heavily into sort of symbolism and national identification. But I know me, I probably won't do that until I get publications in order, such that it can be the original lecture series, then the publication on the topic, then back to a more advanced lecture series on the topic to sort of complete. I have an idea of what I want to do and how I want to do it, but a lot of that is contingent on the peer review process. That is the academic part. I can't rush the editors, and I can't make them decide in favor or against, so at their mercy at this point, which is fine, which is the process. It's supposed to be the case. But I'm not going to do a second installment until I get some of my published works published, at which point then I would revisit that. And if I do, it will be more about what this last section is about: nationalism and symbology. So this is going to come from the following article, Symbolic Studies in Annual Review of Anthropology. So let's look at the political use of symbols. Okay, so here's the definition, right? Symbol is a device for enabling us to make abstractions. Symbol is a device for us, enabling us to make abstractions, right? It's a way in which people can get access to the abstract. For someone like me, symbological influence is more creative. It's not as influential to me because I'm an academic and I'm a philosopher trained in abstractions. So, I don't really need symbols in order to access abstract conceptions. I dabble in the abstract for a living. This is what I do. This is my job, right? My job, it's a hell of a job. I'm not gonna lie, it is a hell of a job. But my job is to dabble in abstractions. So symbology and symbological meaning and significance and implication have almost no effect on me because I don't need symbols in order to access the abstract. I live in the abstract. My office abstract. Everything about my life and my being, who I am as a person, is completely abstracted. And this is what I do for a profession, and this is how I was educated. But you can understand that it might be difficult for people to understand really complex ideas, which explains in part why I'm so intensive on drawing these stick figures in my lecture series, right? Because the ideas I recognize are complex. If I was to sit down more comfortably in a chair and talk to you leisurely, yeah, it might make for a better lecture series, or it probably wouldn't even be a series. It'd probably have more views. It'd be more open to the general public. It'd be less formal. I could do little bite-sized bits of info, 3-minute this, 2-minute that. My idea is not to seek popularity here. I'm not in this for YouTube fame. I'm not in this for YouTube money. I mean, you serious? My idea is to convey in as much detail as feasible, given all my time constraints and all the projects that I'm working on, which are always growing, always multifaceted, to give you something with some meat on it, to give you something tangible, to give you something real, so that you can understand and have access to that abstract. And this is a means of getting you into the abstract, right? So, for example, that's abstract. Right? That means something. Right? Obviously, this is symbolic, right? This means something. You accessing the abstract, and it's not a bad thing. It's a happy thing, right? It can be a happy thing if you are interpretationally predisposed to that, and I am. So, the idea is, for those who don't, which is 99.9999999% of the population, who don't do what I do, which is get paid to think abstractly, and have gotten PhD, MA, BA, all in philosophy, in abstract thought. There's very few of us who have that skill set. This is my skill set. Symbols are things that have an effect, that are extremely powerful, and thus should and ought to and will forever be co-opted by the nation. Any nation will readily seek to co-opt the power, the efficacious nature of symbological construction in order to convey some type of collective idea, in order to convey a collective abstraction, so that people can access that, right? So that people can access this. So I'm not going to go too much into that. I want to sort of stick by the notes and continue. So, social dynamics link pragmatic action to symbolic action. It's a very important point, right? Social dynamics link pragmatic action to symbolic action. So, we have two forms of action. Right? The first is pragmatic action. And the question is, what is pragmatic action? A pragmatic action is a mundane act. Right? So the pragmatic act is mundane. It is the act of brushing your teeth. Pragmatic action. The action facilitates a particular end. That end is pragmatic. In the example of brushing your teeth, the action of brushing your teeth and all the requisite steps needed in order to complete that facilitates dental hygiene, right? So the act is pragmatic insofar as the act facilitates dental hygiene, right? Who thought you would break down teeth brushing to that level? Now, another good pragmatic act, hand washing. So your hands are dirty, you go to the sink, you turn on the faucet, you wash your hands. You wash your hands, you wash your hands, you wash your hands. Now, in terms of the symbolic act is not like the pragmatic act, and I'll give you an example of a symbolic act in a little bit, but I do want you to take mental note of both hand washing and teeth brushing, as mundane an act as they are. Okay. Another thing of pragmatic action, not only is it sort of mundane, but a pragmatic act has use function. The pragmatic act has use function. There is a usefulness to the act. I'm not going to sort of really explain the depths of what use function is. That's its own discourse, which I'm not going to take the time to go into now. But the pragmatic act has use function. The idea of use function is just sort of really generally the recognition that we link our intent to some satisfaction of needs or desires. More than likely needs in terms of pragmatic acts. I need to keep my teeth clean because my dentist says, Jason, hey, keep your teeth clean. So what do? I go and I brush my teeth and I rinse and I floss and ... These acts are useful in allowing me to maintain a proper oral hygiene. It functions, the act functions, in order to facilitate proper oral hygiene. So you get the idea. So the pragmatic, and I'm just going to give three, I'm not going to sort of detail and itemize all of this, but pragmatic actions are typically mundane actions. There are some exceptions, but overwhelmingly they're very mundane, basic actions, nothing extraordinary. It's not an act of heroism. And it has a use function. The act has a function in the world. It facilitates some end. The last bit, in terms of pragmatic action, we recognize that our pragmatic action has to accomplish an end state. It has to do something. It's not a pragmatic act if it doesn't work, if it doesn't complete some task. So that the pragmatic act has to be not just functional, but it has to work. And I don't want to sort of deconstruct sort of this idea of work, but so without going too deep into this, sort of linking use function to work, which is number three, it has to work. That means it has to be, if you were to borrow a concept from the scientific method, it has to be, the function has to be reproducible. It's the simplest way to talk about work, right? The function has to be reproducible. If the function is reproducible, then it works, right? This is a super consolidated version. So there's a very, and that, trust me, it seems like what I just said is simple. It's not a simple thing. It's actually really complex to sort of, and I probably could in another series sort of discuss this in more detail, itemize this in more detail, but the idea is I do a pragmatic act, right? You can imagine, before we got to the toothbrush, that, you know, prior to the advent of toothbrushes, let's go caveman style, you know, there's something caught in somebody's teeth, so you broke off a twig and you stuck it in your teeth and you try to pull it out, or your gum, and I don't know, maybe some of the tree bark it jabbed your gum, but because it came from the floor, it was bacterial, so you got, you know, maybe sepsis in the mouth, and you ended up dying. This is pre-antibiotics. And we realize, you know, taking up twigs from the floor, this is really ridiculous. While taking up a twig from the floor in order to clean your teeth has a pragmatic, is a pragmatic action. I'm using this sort of tool in order to facilitate the end of getting something out of my teeth. It really doesn't work. It's not the most efficient. It's not the best means of facilitating oral hygiene. The reason why toothbrushing facilitates oral hygiene is because it works. To talk about work, what do you mean by work? It means that the function of keeping my teeth clean isn't just sort of anomalous. It's not a one-time fact. It's not that this only occurs under these stringent conditions. No, like the scientific method, it can be, the function can be reproduced. You send the formula to the scientist in Britain, you send the formula to the scientist in Saudi Arabia or in Russia, and you say, here are the chemicals that you would need, here's how you perform the test, and if you do this, you should have this result. The fact that that result can be corroborated internationally, no matter where you go China or Japan, and it's independently corroborated in different labs, legitimizes the function and says that this is the establishment of the concept of work. So without going into more detail than that, a pragmatic action, for all practical purposes, is a mundane act. There are a few exceptions. It has a particular use function, which I explained means ends linking, and it has to work. And you have an idea of what that means. So that's just part of the sentence, right? This is a very dense sentence, a really good sentence, which is why I selected it. Social dynamics link pragmatic action to symbolic action. So now we have not pragmatic act, but we have a symbolic act. Right? So we have symbolic action. A symbolic act might be the act of putting on my tie this morning. Right? So this morning I knew I was going to do my lecture series. When I do my lecture series, unless I'm intentfully making a point, I like to present myself, because this is going to be sort of me in perpetuity for infinite digital years. You know, I want to present myself sort of in this manner. This is not how I dress in my day-to-day life, right? In my day-to-day life, I'm far more casual. So I don't wear ties to work. I don't wear collared shirts to work. I'm very sort of laid back. I'll wear like crazy graffiti art t-shirts, cargo pants, and flip-flops. That's sort of a lifestyle for me. In terms of me putting on this tie, the act of putting on the tie became symbolic. Why? Because while I'm putting on this tie, you know, it's funny, this is revealing quite a bit of me personally. It's bizarre that I'm so into this. I live this stuff, really. While I'm putting on this tie, I've almost fetishized the ritual of putting on the tie. Okay, Jason, you're transforming now into Jason J. Campbell, right? You're going to become this. I mean, believe it, I have credentials and all that other stuff, but, you know, I don't, in my daily life, consider myself Jason J. Campbell. I'm Jason J. Campbell for you. For me, I'm dad, I'm husband, I'm brother, I'm what have you. Putting on this tie, the act of putting on this tie, is a means of transforming myself in order to do this, in order to present this video. So that the act becomes symbolic. I mean, obviously the tie is symbolic in and of itself. It represents business attire, proper business etiquette, a professional working environment, seriousness, maybe even austerity to some extent. It represents, not economic, now austerity is forever tied to economic, austerity in its sort of traditional sense, right? For almost stoic. It represents a sense of almost stoicism, right? Well, this guy's officially, you know, he's presenting himself officially. In terms of the symbolic act, and I'm just going to give a little bit, because this is not really in the lecture series. This takes it a little bit deeper, quite a bit deeper. But the symbolic act also, like the pragmatic act, has conditions that need to be satisfied in order for it to be symbolic. The main condition of the symbolic act is that the symbolic act, it doesn't have to be, but it can be ritualized, right? The propensity for ritualization, right? So ritualization, right? The fact that the act can be ritualized. There are many instances in which you can't, and I'll give you an example in a bit. So I'm not saying that it has to be ritualized or else. It's that there is a potential for ritualization. So for example, in Judeo-Christian tradition, Abraham gets the call to sacrifice Isaac at the top of the mountain. Abraham goes up to the top of the mountain, he takes out the knife, he's going to kill his kid in obedience and loyalty to the divine, and he's told, no, don't do it. Obviously, were he to do it, it would have become a ritual act. That is not a pragmatic act. The act of infanticide is not pragmatic. The act of infanticide in relationship to commands from the divine is clearly a symbolic act. The argument is, yeah, but Dr. Campbell, that act isn't a ritualized act because you only get one shot to kill somebody, right? You're not going to ritually kill somebody every single day. Well, the idea is not necessarily true. It could be ritualized. The act of the symbolical murdering or the symbolical death itself can be ritualized, right? Just in a different sense. So I don't want to go off on any tangents. The idea is there is a potential for ritualized killing. Not the ritualized killing of just groups, sort of in terms of genocide, the ritualized killing of one individual person or one individual entity repeatedly, historically. This is a very pagan sort of concept. It's a very pagan concept. It no longer really exists, and I can't think of many contemporary, if any contemporary examples where we go about ritualized killings. And the night, you know, I've read a lot of Nietzsche. My master's degree was on sort of ancient Greek practices and antiquity. At a long time ago, I was very, very good at sort of reading ancient Greek text. I've since lost that ability almost entirely. But in Dionysian festivals and festivities, ritualized killing was recurrent in the symbolic act, in worship and reverence to the god, in worship and reverence to the deity. So that symbolic killing in a previous era was very, very important. Just quick side note, this in terms of Judeo-Christian conception is, you know, I'm not doing theological stuff because I'm not a theologian, but I know this discourse enough to talk on this. This is part of the significance and the symbolical importance of the Christ figure. And it's contentious, I recognize, right? It's contentious for Jews, it's contentious for Muslims, but the idea, the power of the Christ figure is so huge because the Christ figure, and I mean this as a person, like I'm not trying to disrespect Christians' belief in Jesus Christ, but I'm just saying Christ figure, is that when the Christ figure died, he put an end to the ritualized killing. Like the whole point of Christ dying was that this was the final ritualized act of killing, which is precisely why we don't see this in the West anymore. It was pervasive prior to Christ. It was obvious. It was mundane. It was a pragmatic act in the past. But the Christ figure and the death of the Christ figure put a final end to the ritualized act of killing. Right? So it might have seemed like it was tangential, but trust me, I've been, all I think about when I'm in this mode is this, right? And there's no question that Christianity became an enormous social movement. It was and is and will always be a religious movement, I get it. But, I mean, there's no question. There's tons of research and tons of literature supporting this. Christian practices were immediately co-opted by hegemonized political power because of the collective might and mobilization. It's one of the greatest forces for collective mobilization that exists, right? Obviously, Judaism, Islam, and the other religions, but in terms of the monotheistic religions, it's co-opted by political establishment. There's no question about that. That doesn't necessarily apply to the ritualized act, but to think that the death of Christ put an end to generations. We're talking about millennia's worth of ritualized practice, and made that, pragmatic act, the pragmatic act of killing in reverence for, in absolution, in forgiveness, in homage to the deity of any number of deities. The fact that that act made what used to be a pragmatic act now a symbolic act is huge. It really is big. Alright, so that's the first bit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this, and now that I think about it, I sort of want to get on to the next point. In terms of the symbolic act always has a referential relationship, right? A signification, right? The symbolic act has a signification that transcends the individual, right? This, too, could be the case for pragmatic acts. There are some pragmatic acts where the signification, the referent, rather, of the signification, sort of semiotic language, you have to forgive me, there's no other way to say this, but the referent for the signification is itself something other than the person. So, use function, me. Business, organizational stuff, the business, the corporation, the self. The symbolic act projects itself, the referent for the act is something outside of the person. There are a few caveats to this. You can have symbolic acts that refer to the individual, him or herself. So instead of saying, and I'll give you examples of both in a bit, great examples, just think of it as the symbolic act is itself referential. It's not so much about the act as to where the act is directed. It's usually directed away from self. That's the norm. In some acts, and actually I'll be careful how I'll give a different example because I don't want to give the example I'm really thinking about. It's really contentious. But in other acts, it's directed to the self. So it's inherently the symbolic act is inherently referential. So for example, if it's referenced to something outside of the self, if the act, this symbolic act, references something beyond the self, outside of the self, you can imagine that self-emulation might be a very symbolic act. It was Vietnam War protest. Guy sits down in the middle of the street. The first thing that comes to mind is something heinous, but you get the idea. I want you to see it. It's a symbolic act. It could be ritualized, but for this individual, it's only ever done once. What does the person do? Pours, lighter fluid, gasoline all over his body, lights himself on fire, sits there in sort of Buddhist monk, sort of lotus position, and doesn't flinch, right, and just dies in that position, in flames. Very symbolical act. The act is only done once. It could be ritualized. You see why it's not ritualized. It's a very, very painful thing to do. It inherently refers to something else. It referred to ceasing the Vietnam War protest, and along with the image of the young Vietnamese girl running towards the camera completely naked, probably the two most significant images symbolically of the era, right? The self-immolation of a Buddhist monk, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was necessarily a Buddhist monk, and the young Vietnamese girl running to the camera completely naked, and everybody else behind her. Two powerful images, right? Symbolical images, and it made the United States of America look really, really bad, which is why the protests started to build. It wasn't because the act of war and everything that was occurring in war was so bad. It was the consequence of the images. Look what the images symbolize. It symbolizes American imperialism and the destructiveness, and they're even killing little girls. And, obviously we know what happened, right? People come back from the war, service persons come back from the war, they're getting spit on, they're getting called baby killers, huge social protests, huge social movements. Some of it just, some of it, unfair. Nevertheless, huge social revolt. Why? Because of the reference. It was a reference to the destructiveness and the horror that is war. That is war. Now, in terms of the individual person, and I'm only going to do A and B. I'm not going to just continue adding on to this because I want to stay on track. In terms of the individual, just like me tying the tie becomes not just a pragmatic act, but for me a very symbolic act. And you can see that there's some gray area here. It's obviously symbolic. This represents something. There's no function that this is facilitating in me giving this lecture series. I could give this lecture series in comfort in a beater, but oh my God, he's wearing a beater. Oh, he said beater. Oh, this guy's not serious. Oh, he's trying to get views because he wants to show his body off or blah blah blah. Which is typically the case. You see this video and you see a guy who's like talking to the camera and he's all buff. Or you see a woman and she's talking to the camera about something and there's deep cleavage. You're thinking, oh, people think, oh, this person isn't serious, right? It's about looking at their body and thus getting views, not the content. I want you to think about the content, not about me. So you put on the tie to remind everybody, think about the content, not about the person. Now, you can imagine that part of the addiction that is heroin, that is probably the most addictive substance on the planet, isn't just obviously the overwhelming saturation of opiates in your brain and what that does to your brain. Clearly that's part of it. But it's the ritualized act of sort of the preparation, right? You got to get the tourniquet. What type of tourniquet do you use? You're going to use a rubber tourniquet, you're going to use a cloth tourniquet. You're going to use a rubber tourniquet, and it's the preparation of wrapping the tourniquet around your arm, squeezing it tight. It's about slapping your arm until you see the veins bulge. It's a recognition that the tighter it is, the more the veins bulge. It's the preparation of the spoon or the bottle cap. It's the needle. It's the anxiety and the intensity with which you anticipate that next hit, such that even before it actually even enters your veins, your neurochemistry is telling you it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, and the opiates are coming, and you get a high off of the actual act of preparing to get the high. Right? There is the high, which can never, ever be trumped, but there is a smaller high, but still a very powerful high in preparing to get that next hit. Similarly, if you smoke cigarettes, it's the unpacking of the cigarettes. Just assume that you smoke filtered cigarettes, right? So it's the packing of the cigarette and unwrapping the wrapper and smelling the box, opening up the foil, removing the cigarette, lighting it, inhaling, getting that first taste. You know, it's the ritual, right? So that the ritual itself can become addictive, so that symbolical actions themselves can become addictive. So for each person, they will have their own symbolical acts, and it varies substantially, but you can see why national interest would tend toward symbolical act. Pragmatic as well, but both. You need both. We're only on the first sentence. So that social dynamics link then. So in the middle, S-O, social dynamics, right? Social dynamics. Now we can really appreciate. I think, you know, these people speed reading, right? You know, they say, oh yeah, I read that book in 5 minutes. Oh yeah, I read through that. Oh yeah, I read that, 7 times. I read that book 10 times. I read that book in a week. I read it in 2 days. Did you understand what you read? We just spent 30 minutes on one sentence. We spent 30 minutes on one sentence, right? Social, and this is not a sentence from a book. This is my sentence. I wrote this sentence, right? Social dynamics link pragmatic action to symbolic action, right? Social dynamics link pragmatic action. Sorry, should go here. Social dynamics link pragmatic action to symbolic action. So, I'm not going to give you a general background on Charles Sanders' Peirce semiotic theory. I spent 30 minutes explaining a lot of this, which was informed by semiotics. I talked about significations and referential stuff and blah, blah, blah. Without even seeing this, I know where my lectures are going, so I'm not going to spend time on that. If you want to watch more or understand more, just click on that. You can learn about iconography, you can learn about sort of work function, use function, all that good stuff. So the symbolic action, operational but unknown. That is, the collective consciousness, socially constructed by the intelligentsia to facilitate pragmatic action. The symbolic act could potentially be used to facilitate pragmatic action. So here's the question. How is the process facilitated? Answer, symbols, icons, and indices, right? I can get people to the voting booth in order to do a very pragmatic act of voting by projecting the image of Obama and hope. The projection of the image of Obama and hope, this is the important point. It's not about voting for Democrat. It's about voting. If you see that image and it pulls you to the voting booth to say no to Obama and vote for the other guy, you still have to recognize that the symbolic act of projecting the image incentivizes and motivates pragmatic act, the constituent going to the voting booth. So it doesn't really matter if you vote for him or against him. The image is constructed to get you to vote. You saw the image and you voted for, or you saw the image and it pissed you off and you hated it and you voted against. It doesn't matter who you vote for, it's that the image, as a symbolic representation, got you to go to the polls. Period. Right? And thus, all of this esoteric, theoretical blah 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 is absolutely operationalized in rather mundane practices. This is what designers do. This is what marketers do. And I'm going to give myself another 2-3 years of this hardcore stuff, and then I'm going to go holler at the marketers because I got to get into that stuff, right? Marketing and commercials and all that stuff is just so beautiful. It's just so genius, right? So, shout out to graduate students who are studying marketing and all that other crap, right? And design and all that. We need all of that. We need all of that. We're all in the game together. So pragmatic act, bottom of page 30. Pragmatic action is collectively contingent on the proper motives which are created and embedded in cultural, national, next page, top of 31, religious symbology for the purpose of coordination, mobilization. The idea is pragmatic act, the act of sitting down in order to obstruct someone from, I don't know, in order to obstruct someone, like, oh, I think I saw it, it was like protest to Wall Street or something. They were This happened maybe 6 months ago. A bunch of people were going to have a sit-in in front of the stock market and prevent the traders from going inside the stock market, so everybody was going to sit and obstruct them. And I think they had like mass arrests. It was supposed to be, that was the whole point, is to get arrested. You have to recognize that act has two functions. There's the pragmatic action of my physical body. You would have to literally step on me or over me in order to get inside. So I am physically obstructing. I'm using my body as a means of obstruction. The goal is to obstruct. But that act is also symbolic. It's a representation of sort of the people obstructing the Wall Street tycoons from impoverishing the people by stealing pensions and blah, 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 blah. So that one and the same event, the event would be sort of the obstruction of entrance to the stock market, is both symbolic and pragmatic, right? Both symbolic and pragmatic. So that you make a recognition. And obviously, there's nothing, too much more that needs to be said. Though I really could take this a lot deeper, I sort of will refrain. Top of page 31. So, for example, by definition, a threat is relational. The threat itself is relational in character. So, 1, a knife alone is a knife. Blood on someone's hand alone is simply blood on someone's hand. A clenched fist by itself a clenched fist is a clenched fist, but someone holding, and we have the image here, right? Someone holding a knife with blood on his hand while clenching his fist, as represented in this image, while clenching his fist, binds the relationships between the knife, the blood, and the clenched fist, and it implies that the individual is a killer. What we are, and this would be interesting research. Now, this would be more research for hard scientists like geneticists or genetics students and such. Because this bit has to have there has to be a biological corollary. It's not necessarily a social act, it's a consequence of our biology. So this is undeniably biologically rooted. It has to be. And I understand that interpretation factors into this. But to look at this picture, and I wanted to find an ominous picture, so you see this picture, this guy's got his fist clenched, there's blood on the knife, there's blood on his hand, he's clearly a threat. You recognize it as a threat. It elicits immediately the fight or flight response. Am I going to sit and fight this potential threat? Am I going to run from this? Your biology is predisposed to start secreting any concoction of psychopharmacological mixtures of whatever, adrenaline, what have you, in order to get you to fight or flee. There is a sense in which the recognition that the relationship of the fist, the knife, and the blood produces a threat. I don't know how that occurs, though. Obviously, we'd have to be a physical scientist, like a geneticist. This is probably more chemists or maybe neuropsychology or something, right? How that occurs is something in your brain. I don't know why it occurs. Part of it is a recognition, sort of the socially constructed of, okay, that's clearly a threat. But how your body does that, how your body takes that information, processes that information to recognize that it's a threat, and then start transforming your physical body to respond to that threat is something I just don't know. I don't know. And I'm sure there's tons of research on this. I just don't know it. What's important, however, is a recognition that just this alone, just the observation of this alone, while it's mild, right, your body is aware. Your body's taking, this is why I selected this picture. You're like, oh wow, yeah, that is, and especially if you're looking at it in color. Obviously, I printed my PDFs in black and white. But if you're looking at the PDF, I have it in color, and you're looking at the color, it creates that condition. So, for example, you watch the genius of reality TV is that reality TV is really about just the mundane everydayness, right? Oh, this person likes this person can't stand that person, she's sleeping with her man, or he's messing around with this, and this guy stole a whole bunch of money, and blah, blah, blah. The regular, mundane, everyday bickering. But it's not presented, while it's seemingly presented as sort of just everyday, mundane sort of life, it really is a symbolic act. The act of reality TV is itself very symbolic itself. Why? Because it's not reality because it's projected. Right? My real life isn't on display for the... It's not the Truman Show, right? My real life, unlike reality TV, your real life, unlike reality TV, isn't on display for consumption. I don't get a check from the executives for allowing my life to be on display like they do. Right? So obviously it's not reality. I mean, obviously it's not reality TV. But it's so close to being real. It's so close to being like my life that when I watch this show and someone threatens the character that I identify with, then I really change. My body, while I'm sitting down watching TV, my body, like I might start to perspire. My heart might start to race. Oh my goodness, what is she going to do? Is she going to be okay? Oh, they're about to get in a fight. Oh, she's pulling her hair. Oh, get her. Oh, I'm yelling at the TV. Oh, I can't believe, I hate that bitch. Da da da. I mean, if you were to step outside now and have a camera filming yourself while you're watching reality TV and then watch yourself watching reality TV, you might be like, wow, that's about the most ridiculous thing ever. Which is precisely why I do not watch reality TV at all. I refuse. I just don't watch it. It's ridiculous. And I know that makes me elitist and blah, blah, blah. But it's ridiculous. I don't care about these people. I'm completely apathetic to the life of whoever these celebrities are doing whatever in their houses and with their yachts and their mansions and bickering about, Pinot Grigio or whatever it is that they're arguing about. I'm just thoroughly not entertained. Why? Because to be enthralled by that, it's so real. It's not like watching a cartoon. It's not like watching politics. It's not like, looking at things that are either clearly fabricated like cartoons or clearly real. Chomsky would say that it's not so real, so shout out to Chomsky. But I'll say clearly real like politics. Well, I'm not going to invest my physiological body. I'm not going to put my body to be manipulated by characters that really by characters that exist as real people, but you get the idea, right? Because there's a physiological response to the threat. And that's the genius of all of this. That's the absolute genius of all of this. So the image itself, this is D on 31, the image itself is powerful enough to motivate action in response to the implication that he is in fact a killer. You're either going to fight or you're going to flee. E. A clear visual depiction of the motivation of action in response to implication is expertly done in the 2014 Buick lacrosse dance commercial. So I'll read this and then I'll explain the commercial. You really do need this. So right now, it's a 30-second commercial. Pause the video, click the link, go watch the commercial. It's 30 seconds. Come back, and then we'll continue. So I'll give you a second to pause, and then watch the commercial, come back. Okay, so hopefully you watched the video, you came back. So what ends up happening in this commercial? Dad is chauffeuring what is obviously his daughter, by implication, and her boyfriend to the school dance. So Dad identifies the young boy as a potential threat, right? Not like a threat like this, and not a reality TV threat, but obviously a threat to her chastity. So Dad identifies the young boy as a threat. In response to this threat, Dad sends the relational signals, these are the indices, and I can't take the time to explain that now, to his daughter and her suitor through the radio. So one of the songs, I forget the name of the songs, was like, keep your hands to yourself. Another song was like, I have eyes everywhere. It's sort of like that idea, right? It's sort of like, I'm watching you and, be on your best behavior. But Dad doesn't communicate this himself audibly. What he does is he communicates. He sends the signal to both of them through the radio. Dad does no talking. What he does is he sends the signal about his expectations for their behavioral conformity through the radio. That's clearly what this is about, right? Dad sends his expectations about conformity through the radio. Okay. That there will be no hanky-panky, she says, we get it. She confirms that she has received and interpreted the sort of indirect communication via the radio perfectly, right? So she says, we get it. But nothing was communicated other than Dad playing the music. So if you think about this now, and I'll explain this in a little bit more detail in a second, symbols are instruments of expression. This is a direct quote. Symbols are instruments of expression, of communication, of knowledge, and control. That is a direct quote. Symbols are instruments of expression. Dad was able to express his requirements for chastity. Now granted, the girl was very young, the boy was very young, so it's probably more Dad didn't want any kissing and sort of groping and, pecking and all that sort of heated teenage fondlingness and all that ridiculousness, right, of being adolescent. So Dad doesn't want anything sexual. He doesn't want anything even mildly sexual. Obviously that's not sexual. He doesn't want any petting, heavy petting. He just wants a dance. So Dad communicates his expectation. 1. How does he communicate it? He himself doesn't do this. This is why this act is so symbolic. This is why the commercial represents so well a symbolic act. Dad does this through the radio. He has obviously pre-programmed the radio to select songs that in succession will cause, and I don't want to go too deep into this, but in succession will cause those who the message is intended to know, knowledge. Her knowledge is affirmed by her saying, "We get it," which lets Dad know that his method of communication is effective. So in a sense, without her also playing this game, where she occasionally says, "Okay, I get your message," it's not the case that, Dad will have, he himself will know that she's really not heavy petting in the dance or after the dance. But what Dad does know is that, no, this lines of communication is effective because I have validation from the intended person that, no, they got, in fact, the message. And obviously, it's not explicit. This requires a little bit of sort of, and trust me, this is a very simple example. Communicating messages far more complex with far less sort of, you can't even imagine. Anyway, but you get the idea. And it's about, obviously, control, right? Dad wants to control their behavior while at the dance, and you recognize now that this quote perfectly captures the video. Why? Symbols are instruments of expression, we understand that now, of communication, we understand that now, of knowledge, we understand that now, and of control. So, shout out to whoever came up with the idea. I think I have an idea, but shout out to whoever came up with the general structure for the Buick, what's the name of the car? Buick LaCrosse. Shout out to the Buick LaCrosse conceptualizers. He or she must be an amazing person to have contributed to the development of the Buick LaCrosse commercial. The realization is that in our mundane act, we can be very symbolic. You have no idea how symbolic we can be. Obviously, I'm not going to go any deeper than this. This is already deep enough. And thus, we prepare for the last page. So, an analysis of the 2014 Buick LaCrosse commercial, the expression, Dad is expressing his recognition of the suitor's possible intent. Right? This is with reference to the definition of what a symbol is. The next page, top of 32, last page, communication. Dad is communicating. Right? Dad is communicating his expectation for their conduct by initiating the playlist. Knowledge. The daughter acknowledges both the reception of this indirect communication, which means that she acknowledges the potential threat, which is deep, right? When she says, "Dad, we get it," she's also saying, "Dad, I recognize that he could potentially be a threat." So Dad has incentivized her to see the potential threat in him. Very freaking powerful stuff. This commercial is, if they give out commercial awards, this commercial is super good. I'm incorporating as the end of my lecture series, 20+ hour lecture series on nationalism. This is the end of my 20-hour lecture on ethnicity and nationalism. It's about this commercial. That's how good this commercial is. This is demonstrated by her saying, "We got it, Dad," right? The meaning is the reception of Dad's expectation. Now, granted, think about all that needs to come into play in order for dad to get the validation that no, she in fact understands. He had to set up and devise and construct a way in which to communicate this. He had to do so without the assurance that she would actually get the message. He had to do this also knowing that he might not get confirmation from her even if she gets the message. But the fact that she says, Dad, we got it, means it sends a signal back to Dad that, no, what I did was right. My architecture in which this could be a means of communication is correct. Now, if Dad continually does this, if every time he comes in the car, Dad is continually projecting the same template, Dad is looking more like Mickey Mouse. Like, shout out to Mickey Mouse, not the real Mickey Mouse, like the fake Mickey Mouse. It's just like child's play. No, the daughter was being charitable by validating the message. But to continually project the same message is sort of trite, isn't it? I validate the message. I'll let you know. I'm being gracious in letting you know. The daughter's being gracious in letting her father know that I got your message, Dad. She could have been against you and just left the car and let him speculate whether or not she received the message. It was an act of charity on her part to validate that the message was there. So to continually send the same freaking message, I got it the first time. I got it before the first time, she might say. So the idea is, no, the template has been established, daughter's gotten the message, she was charitable enough to legitimize the fact that the message is useful. Dad, use that trick with somebody else. You know what I'm saying? Move on, carry on, use that with somebody else. To do that with the daughter a second time, she's going to have less and less respect for Dad. Because she's going to think, oh, this is a one-trick pony Dad. And, you know, he's going to be a passive-aggressive Dad now. And every time I go in the car, he's going to be talking to me through the radio because he doesn't have, pardon my vulgarity, he doesn't have the balls to talk to me face-to-face. The more that this is used, the less symbolic the act becomes. The idea is there is the potential for a ritualization, but the idea is if every time I step in a car and every time I'm going someplace, Dad's pulling this same trick, it is no longer symbolic, it becomes mundane. Right? Use that trick with somebody else. I validated to you, Dad, that this trick works, Dad. Use the trick with somebody else. You know what I mean? It's an old hat. And it wasn't really that technical. I mean, when you think about the Buick lacrosse commercial, I'm not really that impressed with the trick. I'm not really that impressed with it. I validated that it in fact works, but we onto some way, 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 way deeper stuff. Right? That, I mean, a child, obviously, the young girl and her adolescent partner understood it. Right? So it's not like it's overwhelmingly powerful. Sort of the trick, right? We get it. Move on. Or not, or, you know, continue to do the same old trick, and entertain yourself, I guess. The little girl is thinking, I said I got it. I said we got it. I said we understand it. You have gotten the validation that this is an effective means. Now do with it as you may, but to continue to do it with me, you lose a lot of credibility. Okay. And then lastly, control. Dad accomplishes two things here. You have to look closely at the end of the video. Right? His daughter, and I'm really spending a whole freaking hour on this Buick lacrosse commercial. It's really good. It's really good. That accomplishes two things. You have to look closely at the end of the video. His daughter will conform, right? She will conform, and the young boy recognizes that her father poses a threat to his own well-being, albeit sort of insignificant for the commercial. And he did this without having to directly threaten the boy. And I captured the expression on the kid's face. Right, so that expression, that sort of screen cap, you see the kid's like, oh my goodness, oh my God, I don't want to do anything and get in any trouble. You know, Dad's watching. He told me he was watching. Her dad's watching me. I gotta be careful. Now, if it's the case that her dad says, hey, I'm watching you, you better be careful, be on your best behavior, it works one time. The daughter has validated it. If Dad is the type of dad, and there are, unfortunately, I'm so not this kind of dad, but there are, unfortunately, these types of dads who every time you do anything that he doesn't like, he's going to threaten you, he's going to threaten you, he's going to threaten you. There's going to come a point at which the young boy goes out, and the young boy, he's like, you know what, screw Dad. we're going to have you pet. And they kiss at the dance and they come home. Did anything happen? No, nothing happened. Dad looks less powerful. The idea is to do it and to do it once and to make sure that it's unequivocally clear. Hope that the other player is gracious enough to give you some epistemic, is gracious enough to give you some epistemic verification that the system of communication, symbolically, has been interpreted, has been understood. That is a complete gift from the daughter to say, we got it. If she didn't say that, if she didn't say, we got it, he would never have known whether or not it was effective. In her saying, Dad, we got it, she compromises a bit because now she reinforces the effectiveness of the system. Now, insofar as she says, she got it, what the Buick lacrosse commercial can't show you is her ability to watch Dad. Now I can watch the type of dad I have. I was charitable, and I told you, and I've demonstrated. I got the screen pick, right? And I showed you that I got it, and that the communication lines has been effective, which I didn't have to do because I recognize, you have to recognize that insofar as the girl does this, and insofar as Dad knows that this is legitimate, now Dad can habituate this. He can do this all the time. But that's not cool because she was being so cool. She put herself up to be exploited by saying, we got it. She could have said, well, no, I don't have it, and forced Dad to have to say something. But she didn't. She was very cool about it. And she says, Dad, we got it. If it's the case that Dad now knows that that's effective, and that's what he does every single time, then don't tell me about the type of dad that you are. You're showing me the type of dad that you are. You're the type of dad that likes that passive-aggressive stuff. You're the type of dad that, despite the charity of the young girl saying, Dad, we got it, this is an effective symbolic means of communication, and you can use this on my older sister or my younger sister or my older brother, my younger brother, or Dad, you know, shout out to you, you built something that you're proud of. I mean, there's far more symbolic and effective means of doing this. Like, this is Mickey Mouse. But I was charitable in letting you know that this was good. And every time I get in the car, Dad, every time I get in the car, Dad, you're going to do this simple game? Well, the next time you try something, the little girl might not validate it. And you never know about the little girl. She's in tune now. She's now recognized that there's a different way to communicate in the world, and she might be able to come up with something that's so freaking awesome. They might not want to share it with you, Dad, because, you know, you're the type that likes to, you're impressed by your little tricks, right? Your parlor tricks. So the idea is, that's the point, right? She was gracious. The young girl was gracious in communicating this by saying, we got it. And what needs to happen the second it's validated is a recognition of her outstanding character by putting herself up for exploitation and validating the system. And second, dads need to stop doing that. Dads need to do something different. Come up with some new symbolic stuff. And maybe the daughter will grant Dad that validation. But you can imagine if Dad continually does this, the next time, though she may understand, though she may see, she's probably not going to validate it. And Dad will have to question for the rest of his life whether or not it's effective, right? Because, no, last time I did that, it was exploited. Every time I got in the car, Dad went with his theatrics. Next time, anytime I see anything that he does that I recognize is symbolic, I'm not going to validate it. And he'll have to wonder whether or not it is effective, right? So it's a very, very interesting game. And the last bit, and then we're done. The actor's face perfectly captures his knowledge of the threat Dad poses to him if he does not conform with Dad's expectation. Any nation's use of symbols is exactly the same way, creating nonverbal cues which condition behavioral expectations among the masses. This is all me. These cues acknowledge existing threats and pose new threats to those that would seek to undermine national interests. With that, there is no fanfare. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and this concludes my lecture series into theories of ethnicity and nationalism. Have a good day.